I'd like to just open up by thanking you all for joining. Obviously, we put these things out there in the hopes that people will come and listen to what we have to say and listen to the developments on these important topics. And so we appreciate that you're taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us. My name is Bryan Flannigan. I'm the Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Alliance. And today's webinar is part of a new series that we're launching. We'll hold these sessions every couple of months. And bring issues to the fore that we think just require time and attention from folks and to help advance sort of the narrative on building decarbonization across the country. Malgré que le webinaire aujourd'hui soit présenté en anglais, vous pouvez toujours activer l'option afficher sous-titres or show captions below at the bottom of your screen pour recevoir une transcription simultanée de la discussion aujourd'hui si vous préférez de l'entendre en français. And of course, before we get started, the Building Decarbonization Alliance has staff across many provinces, and we acknowledge the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples on which we work and live. We recognize and respect the ongoing relationships that Indigenous peoples have to the land, and we commit to the ongoing process of reconciliation. So I'll just give a couple of quick slides. For those of you who are familiar, obviously you've seen this material before. We've given this information at many presentations over the last 6 months or so. For those who are not, the Building Decarbonization Alliance is really on a mission to accelerate electrification of buildings in Canada. And we're doing that with an ever-growing industry alliance. We currently have over 150 organizations that are participating in the Building Decarbonization Alliance that represent organizations right across the entire building ecosystem that all share an interest in advancing electrification of heating end uses in our buildings. I mean, the obvious doesn't necessarily need to be stated, but we're way behind on decarbonizing this sector. Emissions are not decreasing at the rate that they need to, and so we have to have some step changes and some differences in our policy approaches, and that's what we're trying to do with this coalition. And so we welcome your time and attention for those of you who are active participants in our work. We're part of the Transition Accelerator, and the Transition Accelerator is a Canadian not-for-profit working really to solve these complex challenges that we have and trying to work on how we build a prosperous future through pathways that lead to net zero emissions in the long run. And we have a number of different initiatives that you may have heard of that are sort of complementary to what we're doing: Electrifying Canada, the Hydrogen Hub, the Center for Net Zero Industrial Policy, et cetera. And the intent of these different initiatives is really to kind of have sector-specific work being undertaken, but having that work sort of unified in a complex puzzle that leads to a net zero future economy that's integrated and takes into account sort of the trade-offs that need to be made among different subsectors of the economy. So we're part of that approach. We represent the building sector and work really fundamentally as part of a whole of economy approach to achieve our objectives. So that's a little bit about us. In terms of the flow for today, following these opening remarks, I guess, we'll do a really quick hit on some of our policy work so far this year leading up to this residential grid constraint question. And then we'll open a short polling question. We want to get you involved, hear some of your thoughts on the topic. So we'll do a couple quick polls throughout the session. We'll do one at the beginning and then a couple at the end as part of the Q&A. And after that little overview and the polling question, I'll invite our panelists to share their perspectives on the issue. We'll save some time for questions at the end, about 15 minutes, give or take. And you're welcome to use the question and answer panel for that. John Perkis, our Director of Partnerships, will be sort of reviewing those questions. And I just ask you to be specific to a panelist if you have a question for Aaron or Kirk or Rod or Will. To just direct the question to them so that we can manage those as they come in. I would be really remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to remind everyone that we are moving forward with our National Decarbonization Forum with the sort of theme of pathways to electrification. That's going to be taking place April 17th and 18th at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. We're really trying to make this a different kind of an event, much more like a workshop, very highly interactive, where participants are going to be broken out and working on issues across the sort of the various policy spectrums that we're trying to deal with, be they market development and labor or grid impacts such as today's session, or regulatory policy reforms and things like that. So we think it's going to be very compelling. We invite you to come to Ottawa and participate. Those tickets should be going on sale imminently. We're just getting the site ready to launch. So I want you to keep an eye open for that when it does happen. So it's been a very busy year for us at the Building Decarbonization Alliance. We launched about 7-8 months ago officially in April, and we've had a bit of a continuous stream of policy pieces that have been published with lots of collaboration from others within the ecosystem and other think tanks nationally, which we're very thankful for. The first piece was really called the Case for Building Electrification in Canada, sort of is intended to be a compendium of everything we think we know so far about what it's going to take to electrify our buildings and the pros and cons of doing that from various perspectives, whether they be GHG emission reductions or sort of the market development and the amount of technology that we need to be put in place to make that happen. That piece is intended to be evergreen, and we'll be updating it every year with sort of updated information as we learn more about labor issues and market development issues, and kind of keeping that up to date. The next piece that we released in the summer, very timely, was really around, we have a huge amount of sales of air conditioning units still happening in the country. What would happen if those air conditioning units were required to be heat pumps instead? It turns out, if you download the report, many benefits associated with doing this, from the fact that you basically reduce heating costs in the shoulder seasons. You are still putting in air conditioning and providing that service for people in a changing climate, and that's becoming more and more important. And there's some traction with this as a policy piece in terms of the time and attention that it's getting in terms of the potential costs and benefits of adopting such a policy. So we're really proud of that work. And I'll skip over the grid implications because we're doing that today. But the next piece that we're launching next week is the case for the Building Decarbonization Alliance's open source model. And we're very proud to be partnered with the Energy Modeling Hub to bring an open source tool to practitioners across the country to be able to grapple with the cost and benefits of electrifying buildings in a way that's open source, transparent, and that allows ongoing development and collaboration. So you'll keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming out next week, and we'll be presenting it at the Energy Modeling Hub's National Forum on the 11th of December. So we're looking forward to that. All right, sorry about that, just had to clear my throat there. So that takes us to the piece that we released about a month ago today. I'll just give a little bit of an overview of it. But before I do that, I guess we'll do the first poll question. Hopefully this will work. We've had a couple of glitches leading up to it, but I'll just ask John to put that poll question up. We just want to get your thoughts on this question of residential new construction and ensuring that new buildings that we put in today are electrified. So hopefully everybody can see this. Post one word that describes your perspective, your hopes about new construction being net zero, or whatever concerns you might have. And we'll see what that winds up looking like when everybody pops a word or two into the poll. We'll give that a couple seconds. Nice. All right, well, thanks everyone for doing that. I love it. Affordable, sitting right there in the middle. Very important issue. I think Rod will have a lot to say about that. definitely some challenges associated with getting there in the near term. And I think our panel will talk a little bit about what's happening in the in the longer term. Definitely a big challenge. We'll talk a little bit about the near term. Grid capacity is up there. Oh, I like low hanging. That's nice. Yeah. Efficiency always comes back. Of course, very, very concerned with that from a grid impact perspective. By far and away, the question of affordability, and this is something that we come across obviously all the time, that we have to understand that the current housing crisis is really one of affordability, and so making sure that as we move forward, things are affordable for Canadians. Lots to consider about what exactly we mean by affordability. For sure, that can be debated in a number of different ways. But we'll be hearing from Rod, I think, who has some direct experience in that. So I think we have the right panel. I'll just go back to the presentation here. Thank you so much for your participation. I'll give a quick overview and then we'll bring the panelists in. Let's see where we at here. Yeah. The report that we put out wasn't something that was in our calendar to get done this year. Obviously, grid impacts is an ongoing stream of inquiry and research that we're working on. But really, the impetus of this was a story that appeared in Le Droit here locally in Gatineau, where City Council was discussing and debating future plans for low carbon building performance standards, basically. And a representative from Hydro-Quebec was there suggesting that, if things are going to be all electric going forward, that they need to coordinate very carefully and have planning to make sure that capacity was going to be there. But really, the way that the story positioned things was such that you might be left with the impression that we wouldn't be able to do net zero construction locally here, and that Hydro-Quebec rather would not be able to provide services if that was going to be the case. And the information space kind of got lit up with those that might want to delay our progress, suggesting that this was a reason to go forward with the status quo situation, to keep costs down and to use kind of current equipment. So we didn't really think here that was necessarily the case, and certainly didn't seem to be what the representative from Hydro-Quebec was actually saying. And so we thought, well, what is the current situation with respect to near term? And remember, in context, we've got a huge debate happening nationally about access to housing and inventory, and we need to build more inventory of housing that is affordable and accessible. And if we're going to build a lot of new inventory, then our contention is obviously, and I think everybody here on the call would agree, that new construction really needs to be low carbon, and we can't have to be in a situation of putting in new homes today that need to be retrofit just a few short years down the road, when we really need to get these equipments in place. And so we did a bit of research. We did a bit of qualitative analysis and interviews, and we found basically that broadly speaking, the question of whether or not utilities would be ready in the near term to have these new construction projects be fully electrified is just not really a concern. Of course, that there are highly localized grid constraints that might be in place in the transmission distribution system, but these could be worked around, and if there was sufficient planning in the near term. We found that utilities work very closely with developers and local governments to make sure that there's generally sufficient lead time for these kinds of projects when they're on the books, to allow the grid to be ready for these near-term projects. And obviously the lead time varies depending on the size of the project. Bigger projects have bigger impacts, but that by and large utilities this is a course of their day-to-day business, and there are thousands of new extensions that are happening in service territories all across the country that take place in a bit of a status quo sort of situation. So that was at a really high level what we found. Our study was not the final answer. There's a lot of ongoing work that we're trying to do to understand whether that's really truly applicable in a broad basis across the country, but based on the limited number of interviews, that was sort of the case. And so that's sort of the setup to today's conversation. I'd like to bring in our panelists who are really well placed to speak to some of these issues. So today we have Will Beardmore, President and founder of Bluewater Energy. We have Elis, the Manager of Distribution Planning for the Lower Mainland at BC Hydro. Kirk Huntley, Senior Manager, Capacity Planning and Intelligent Grid from Toronto Hydro, and Nadeau, Managing Partner, Innovation Building Group. So I'll stop my share. I can do that. And just call on each of the panelists to give a bit of an introduction and let us know sort of what you do, how you're connected to this issue, and a couple of thoughts on the question from your perspective. And then we'll get into a bit of Q&A. I'll start with by handing it off to Will.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, I'm Will Beardmore, Bluewater Energy. We are in the renewable energy space, and we've partnered with a number of builders who are ahead of the curve in terms of building construction and who are pursuing net zero ready and net zero construction standards and offering that product to their clients. On the net zero ready side, we do a lot of consulting and design work to ensure that homes can in fact generate an equivalent amount of energy to what they're designed to consume over the course of the year. And on the net zero side, we provide installation and integration services. So, you know, in Ontario, where we primarily operate, what that translates into is a lot of work with utilities, with the Electrical Safety Authority, with municipal building departments, in order to help builders you know, sort of adopt the renewable energy generation and integrate it into the homes. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now, I'm glad to see Kirk on the phone in the meeting here, because one of the biggest challenges we're facing in Ontario is the generation capacity limits for micro generation, which are the primary avenue for residential application. And so, you know, in terms of electrification and electricity transformation, we're switching from, you know, hybrid fuel to single fuel source, and that being electricity. Loads in the home are increasing. We're seeing builders have difficulty with managing the increasing loads and the peak demand in the home. And then when we try and achieve net zero and offset that with renewables, we're crossing that threshold of micro generation, small generation. And along with that goes a substantial amount of administrative and additional cost. So I'll leave it there, hand it off, and we can come back anytime you want.
Yeah, so I mean, just the policies that are in place, you know, there's things that we can do to sort of streamline things and get those kind of taken care of. Great overview. Well, really appreciate it. Let's go to Aaron next. Aaron, maybe let us know a bit about yourself and how you're connected to the thing.
I was about to say good morning again, and I keep making that mistake. So good morning to those.
It is morning where you are.
I'm Aaron Elis. I manage the distribution planning group for the Lower Mainland at BC Hydro out on the West Coast here. My team is responsible for the distribution grid performance, which includes capacity, reliability, safety. And my group puts together capital plans for investments in the grid and creates those projects. And part of how we get there is to put together a load forecast, and that really is our vision kind of for the future of what capacity needs do we have at our substations. And one of the entertaining things to me is that our load forecast is made up of all the new loads coming in that we see, including things like building decarbonization, electric vehicles, you know, various other sectors. But it also includes a large, what we call the DSM, or demand side management savings, so the big negative. And so like when we actually look at this, I think like we're averaging about 100 megawatts a year of new additional incremental energy savings from energy efficiency programs and demand side management programs. So that's where I come is that it's not all doom and gloom and addition. There's also a subtraction that's going on, and kind of also from, you know, from a utility perspective or a BC Hydro perspective is we're really, we have the Power Smart brand, which some of you may have heard of. The idea is that let's use the energy we have as efficiently as possible. So that's what I'd like to take it along, is as we add these new things, we can do it in an efficient way.
Yeah, thanks Thanks. And I'm seeing a couple of things in the chat too. Like there's lots that we can do on, load flexibility that often is overlooked. It's harder to quantify, it's harder to model. There's community scale things that we can do to really reduce the impact of individual homes that going forward in terms of planning. So there's lots there in terms of reducing those impacts that I think gets interesting as well. Let's go over to Kirk next, Kirk from Toronto Hydro.
Hi everyone. My name is Kirk Huntley. I am the Senior Manager of Capacity Planning and Intelligent Grid here at Toronto Hydro. Now, the team I lead generally is responsible for some of the same elements Aaron was talking about. We generally plan the capacity and connections for the grid. So basically, a lot of our work is in load forecasting, in the demand space, as well as distributed generation resource connections. So, William, I'm sure I'll touch base with you again, but generally speaking, what we have been careful to do over the recent period was cultivate very close relationships with municipal government, the city of Toronto, and developers directly. A lot of the time, we work in a space that's generally occupied by something else. So, it's a lot of brownfield type projects. You knock something down and build something else there. So, contrary to how, some of the more diverse utilities operate in terms of space, we are very land constrained in this urban environment. So we do place very, very close emphasis on working with our developers to understand needs. Like come to us and come often, come to us early and come often. Timing is really, really critical in planning the grid. In the short term, we generally have several tools we use to manage grid capacity. Grid capacity is not a concern for us from the builder's perspectives. What we have chosen to do over the short term is manage through load demand. We move load around. Of course, there is a cost to that, but at the end of the day, there are tools available in the short term to manage grid capacity, and we have been able to employ those tools very effectively over the most recent time.
Amazing. Thanks, Kirk. And yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have representation from two different types of utilities is, if I think about the geography and the density that Kirk and his team are dealing with, and the ability to deal with and to know development projects as they're coming forward, it's a totally different game when you go to a provincial scale utility and how Aaron and their team must be working. So those differences can become important. I'm hoping that we can touch on that a little bit as we get into the conversation. Last but not least, Rod, I mean, we've been corresponding and you've been participating quite a lot with us. We're just in awe at how you've been able to create products that are really, really crushing, in terms of the not only the emissions profile, but in terms of the cost as well. And that question in the word cloud on affordability was there. I'd love to hear a little bit about you and your work, and let our listeners understand the way that you've been able to accomplish things, and that'll set up some context for the further conversation that I think we're going to have here.
Hi, well, I'm Rod Nadeau. I'm a managing partner at Innovation Building Group, and we've been building high-performance houses and buildings since the mid-'80s. And back then, it was very hard to build a high-performance building, and it certainly cost a lot more. In the last 10 years, it has steadily gotten easier to build high-performance buildings with all the new products on the market, and the costs have come down. We kind of have weeded out the 10,000 choices we have out there in buildings and come up with a formula that seems to work well for us in mid-rise, low-rise buildings, and also single-family homes and duplexes. Our buildings are all electric, have been for a long time. we pursue lowering the demand and energy efficiency first before we start looking at any other strategies with respect to the grid and size. In terms of our buildings, we had to put a 1200 amp service in based on the electrical code here in British Columbia. And in the last 5 years, we haven't exceeded 400 amps in that building. So, the model of using energy efficiency first is always the best strategy to reduce the demand. Our apartments, we're a design, build, develop company, and we also keep our buildings, so we're very cognizant of energy and maintenance costs. So we're always designing for resilience and lower costs. So our apartments in climate zone 6 in British Columbia are heating for $30 to $50 a year. And our hot water demand with heat pump hot water is around $120 a year per unit. And so, and we're doing this according to a cost study that was done on the Net Zero Energy Challenge buildings that we participated in. We're doing this at a 32% discount to standard code minimum buildings. So all you builders and developers out there, there's a huge opportunity in this space to get ahead of the codes that are coming up. And you'll be so far ahead of your competition, or be scrambling to catch up. So it's a good time to start looking into net zero, high performance, all electric buildings. They're easy to do.
I love it. I always love talking to Rod. It's that sage approach and that reassuring voice that this is just a piece of cake and we got it. I love it. Well, thank you very much for the introductions, everyone. Of course, we're here to really answer the question in the near term, if we're going to build a bunch of new inventory, is there any reason why it can't be all electric and low carbon? So I guess I'll start with Aaron, and just in terms of a utility representative, like in the near term, in the next 1 to 5 years, this residential grid constraint, when it comes up and people say, hey, we shouldn't do it, like, should it really be considered a concern? Is BC Hydro kind of ready for electrified new construction? Why or why not, or what might be the caveats or asterisks that you would put on there?
Yeah, that's the hard question. That's the big question. And it always depends what you mean by capacity. So I'll start with, got some calls from a municipality to come in, we're having problems with capacity in our system. Can you talk us through what you can do? And I kind of looked at our data, and the capacity on the feeders we had tons of capacity. We had megawatts per feeder, and we had tons of feeders. And I'm thinking, like, build stuff. And when I actually kind of got to the meeting, the definition of capacity that they were using was our design office. So our local design office, we had staffing issues, and it was taking longer to get design packages for new builds to connect. And so it was like, oh, okay, here I was going to say, no, I don't have a capacity. But in that case, we had a brief period of understaffing that we've since solved. So I think the short answer is no. I mean, our job as a utility is to connect customers. And we have processes in place to do that. And generally, its timelines are the challenge. So, and for the most part, we go back to kind of the 80-20 rule, or even the 99-1% rule, is that we hear the complaints from the 1% and we don't hear the 99% saying, hey, we're connected. So I think a couple other things to kind of say why I'm not overly concerned is that when we actually do see complaints, they tend to be in areas of high development. And really, the issue isn't so much what heating we're using or are we going for net zero. The issue tends to be just, we've gone from a very rural area and we're building lots of multi-unit residential buildings. And, there's a lot of work going on. We have to build roads, we have to build new sewer, we have to build water, and we have to build electricity. So, as we build new things, we have to build new utilities, right? And there's timelines associated with that utilities. So I never classify that as a capacity issue. If I look at some of our existing neighborhoods, we don't have a distribution grid capacity per se, but we have people like looking at electrifying their housing or their heating in their housing. And, talking about maybe I need a new 800 amp service compared to the 100 amp service. But I think Rod hit it on the head earlier, is a lot of these requests are driven by kind of just poor requests to the utility and our electrical codes that don't allow us to like build efficiency in. So we're building 600 amp services for customers, and they're taking time to build, but often the customers actually don't need it. And it's a lot of, it's almost like we get excited and we have these disagreements and these concerns, but really at the end of the day, the power is not used. So those are kind of some of the reasons that I'm not overly concerned. A couple other things on that is that I know I saw Gabby from Liquor Geospace on the call. We recently did a grid impact study in Vancouver with them, and we're also doing one over in Saanich and Victoria, and saying like, hey, what is the impact of some of these building code changes or the electrification on our existing facilities? And the answer that kind of we're coming up with is that the drive to all electric isn't really driving the load growth. It's the other thing. It's the housing units that we're actually building kind of as part of this, housing crisis that we hear about, or, expensive housing, need more units, if you're a little bit more pragmatic and don't like the word crisis. But that's really what's driving a lot of the growth that we're seeing. And as I said before, it's like there's a lot of opportunities for doing this efficiently. And if we do it efficiently, the grid isn't really the limitation.
Great overview, Aaron, to kind of compact what is it's a big answer to kind of compact into a little bit of time. And I want to just quickly let people know who are listening, we're not talking about what the challenges are going to be in 2040 or there's going to need to be more capacity. There's going to need to be a build out of the grid. We're really talking about in the near term, if we're trying to make some decisions today about what to build, what are the real implications here? So I appreciate the focus on that kind of current development question. And, a lot of the same kind of constraints might be valid if you're talking about alternatives heating, just based on capacity and how quickly things need to grow. So Kirk, I'll throw the same question over to you, as a municipal utility, you have some different kinds of constraints, but in the near term, if there was a big multi-residential development or new neighborhood that was being proposed, is the capacity locally a concern? If so, why or why not?
All right. Along the same lines, like Aaron, I think the important distinction to be made here with respect to the capacity discussion has always been whether or not the impact on peak demand is what matters to the utility, but everyone else comes with a demand. And the effective peak demand is an important distinction we make when we discuss with our customers. Our grid is normally planned on a peak demand basis, and oftentimes, when we see customers come to us, they effectively come with a big ask, and we have to literally sit them down and explain that the time, the profile, the load curves, all of those matter. So I think one of the most important things that we've been successfully able to do in Toronto to manage this issue is engagement. In that, we have basically kept a very close relationship with our developers, and we have a development planning group that liaises with our developers and the city of Toronto on an almost continuous basis. So the minute something becomes, a development plan of any sort, we start to sit with you to talk about demand profiles, and we get a sense of what your load will look like, not just what it is in terms of quantity. And that is exactly what is important for the impact on the grid, understanding the profile of the load. Now, when it comes to things like distributed generation, for example, those discussions are also part and parcel, as well as energy planning. District energy, for example, microgrids. Those tend to be something that's a little bit more common when we talk to our large-scale urban developments. And but the integrated planning approach that we have taken of late has yielded significant benefits. Keep in mind, we plan at basically 3 different levels in the Ontario electrical system. The LDC, which is Toronto Hydro in this case, plans the distribution. Then we coordinate with our transmitter to plan on the transmission side, and then, of course, our bulk system operator, which takes care of the generation to load balance. Those 3 levels of planning take place on an almost cyclical basis, continuously. And that is why we were able to upfeed a lot of the bottoms-up information into the planning process. But it is important to understand, I think some of the other panelists kind of highlighted, the higher up you go in the system, the longer it takes to get things done. So essentially, you do have to pay very close attention to timing.
Yeah,
And
we heard that in the study, that question of timing and the lead time, and also like just not presupposing where a feeder might be located for your project. All these things introduce delays. So that kind of coordination becomes really, really important. I'm going to stop there, Kirk, so we can get Rod in on the conversation. Thanks so much for the response. It sounds like that planning coordination function is really high priority at your utility. Rod, I mean, as a builder, developer, you know, you're doing all electric now. It might not have always been the case. When you're currently proceeding and dealing with utility, in this case with Aaron, what do you find is the difference in terms of building fully electric versus using fossil fuels? What are issues that some of the other builders might consider, or what has been your experience from that perspective in interacting with the utilities to get the project done?
There's never been a capacity issue in dealing with BC Hydro. It's always been getting somebody's attention to get us the design drawings, or if there is some type of issue, like we're facing in Seashell, where we have to change a pole and put some undergrounding in, it takes a long time to get that work done. In terms of the electric portion of the building, it's pretty simple. We just have our electrical engineer. We always work within the codes. We're never trying to buck the codes or the system. It's just not worth it. So it's mostly just very localized connection issues that we have to deal with. And that's generally like in a residential area where we're changing, 4 houses into a 36-unit apartment building. And so that takes a little bit of time to plan. And
Excellent.
It's just easy. We don't have gas. We don't have to deal with the gas contractors. We don't have to deal with the utility. We don't have to design it. It's a lot safer. We don't have any health issues in our buildings with people with gas ranges or gas fireplaces that leak. So it's part of our resilience as well, just not having problems in our buildings.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned all of that, Rod, because obviously when we talk about the challenges of electrification, we're always focused on the electrification, the adding part. What are we adding? It's often more difficult to talk about the counterfactual. What are you taking away? What are the things that you save time and energy on? So I'm glad that you're bringing that into the conversation. I want to bring Will back in. Will, all of the solar installations, you do battery installations, you do backup systems. A lot of the conversation is around what can we do? What should we be doing? What is cost effective now, kind of behind the meter, to reduce peaks, to control loads? And you've got that kind of bird's eye view. Love to hear, what's possible. What are you seeing happening in the market? And sort of what are some of the things that, if you could be king for a day, you'd institute in terms of changes?
Yeah, so the conversation around electrification and the impact of that is very much one of what happens to the amount of electricity required to operate the home in terms of peak load. So when we moved from natural gas forced air heating to air source heat pump, and cold climate air source heat pump with an electric backup, for instance, for when temperatures get down below what the mechanical equipment can handle in terms of extracting heat from the outdoor air, that's when we see loads increase substantially, and the ability to, number one, offset that with renewable energy generation, which is the requirement for net zero certification with the Canadian Homeowners Association, and the goal, and or build in resiliency in terms of how do you back up a system like that in a grid outage and a power failure, which we have an increasingly number of home buyers that are concerned with. And they're not just concerned about that in the colder parts of the year. It is becoming a greater concern in the summertime due to wildfires and outdoor air quality. And so, we've had conversations with a number of home buyers in a number of new communities who are seriously considering purchasing all electric homes, who have legitimate concerns about whether or not they're going to be able to operate their air conditioner and their HRV, ERV in the summertime when they can't open their windows because outdoor air quality has been compromised due to wildfires. And take it as you will. The reality is that it's science, it's physics. The more energy that we need, the more energy that we have to generate, store, and distribute in the home. We're already at the limit for the most part for 200 amp services in most homes, and that's why we're seeing the discussion around service upgrade avoidance becoming more and more prevalent. And so, we have energy management systems and power control systems that can deal with that. However, we have an electric code that doesn't permit it necessarily, or there's a lot of gray around that. And on the utility regulatory side in Ontario in particular, we have limits to how much generation capacity we can install in a residential setting. We have limits in generation capacity. We have thresholds, and the threshold is too low for us to meaningfully power and back up a home in Ontario. So that's a significant problem, because once we go over 10 kilowatts of parallel generation, then we trigger a connection impact assessment, which increases administrative costs to the tune of $20,000 to $30,000, and a homeowner reasonably justifiably can't offset that or can't factor that in. So we have some code issues, we have some regulatory issues. I have some proposed solutions if I'm king for a day. We raise the the definition of microgeneration from 10 kilowatts to 25 kilowatts. Now we can power and back up electric homes all day long. We take some of the data that Rob's talking about, operational data from real world buildings that have been monitored, where we have clear, verifiable data that shows that when we do load calculations based on Canadian Electric Code requirements, we see the translation of, I think you said you had a 1200 amp service and you haven't peaked over 400 amps, Rob. So, I mean, that's meaningful information, and that has to be involved in the discussion. Code reviews have to be done. Microgeneration limits have to be increased, and we have to make this easier and cheaper for homeowners to do from an administrative and regulatory side, because equipment is expensive enough. And if we're talking about communities that are all electric and no gas, and we can't bring in gas-powered standby generators to back up homes, now you're putting additional risk, and you're making building resiliency into the community a lot tougher and a lot more expensive. And so we have to meaningfully engage in that conversation. Power control systems, more favorable regulatory policy, and then we need to understand that how we tie this all together, the Canadian Electric Code has to be amended and modified in order to permit it, understand it, and write it in.
Really great points. It's interesting too that there are different forces that might pull the various regulations in different directions depending on who you talk to and what the priority is for those revisions and amendments. I think it's very important also. This isn't a slam dunk. there are genuine sort of constraints. Well, most of them have to do with the regulatory landscape. It seems that these things take a long time to update justifiably. Those things can't be changed sort of willy-nilly, but there seem to be a lot of sort of issues, whether it's at the municipal, provincial, or federal level, that are regulatory in nature, that just are not keeping pace with the pace of change that we might want to see in the marketplace. And so the importance of having these kinds of discussions, having all of you who are listening kind of reinforcing the need to move forward more quickly is just paramount to getting these things done in a timely fashion. I'm watching the time go by. Great responses to the questions so far. I think probably given the number of questions that we have, I'll bring John in to kind of go through and maybe pick out a couple of the key questions and dole them out to each of the panelists to bring them in on and respond directly on some of the things that we're hearing. John, are you able to do that?
Yeah, that sounds good. And
Thank
so
you
there
so
are a
much.
number of questions, and we'll see how many we can get through. There's a sort of a themed one where several people have talked about thermal energy and its role in either helping reduce peak demand, or its role in addressing heating in a new neighborhood or new development scale. And so I'm wondering if there's any responses that you have or experience that you have in association or relation to thermal energy networks. So this is district heating, geothermal heating, anything that is taking heat from elsewhere. We see that with heat pumps, of course, but more on the sort of the geothermal and district energy side.
Yeah, I just maybe from a Vancouver context, there's been a number of projects where, for instance, geothermal or waste sewer heat being incorporated, and we've done some. We're again kind of on the side of the desk doing some studies with some of the developers on, trying to use that energy versus electricity. Again, the best use of the energy, and we've seen some good success, but again, it works for certain locations. It has to be large development, has to be planned to make the economics work. But where it has worked, it's been a big benefit to us, as in a best use of energy and not kind of overtaxing the grid.
Wonderful. So a more specific question for Rod, and I think this sort of goes back to you've been doing this for a long time. So Nick was asking, what's one thing that we should be doing to convince or motivate your fellow design build developers to share your same perspective on undertaking fully electric resilient buildings?
Well, from a builder housing provider perspective, it's just cheaper and better and easier. So that's probably the easiest arguments to take it up. There is, I think, biggest constraint is lack of knowledge in the housing design, architectural engineering folks. They have to provide a design that they can guarantee will work. So they don't like stepping out of their comfort zone. And the good thing that we have is we have 5 years of data from our buildings backing up the systems that we put in place that have worked. We've made lots of mistakes and we've paid for them dearly, but we fixed them. And now we know how to do this. We've been sharing our knowledge through case studies in ZebEx, and currently we're putting together a proposal for CMHC to share all of our designs as an open source library of designs that any builder could just utilize. So it's not hard anymore. It was really hard 10 years ago, and now it's easy. You just have to pick the right choices of the 10,000 choices facing you as a designer.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Thank you, Rod.
Amazing, Rod.
So another question here. This is from Ian McKevie in Durham. So in a place like Durham region where I work, we're seeing electrical grid capacity constraints as a barrier to status quo new construction. Never mind the notion of full electrification. Durham region is experiencing significant growth in the context of the GTA. We're hearing from Toronto and Vancouver, but are these issues perhaps more pronounced in outlying suburban areas? And LDCs in the outlying areas have significantly less capacity, you would imagine. So I know we have BC Hydro and Toronto Hydro on the phone. I'm not sure if you've heard of other capacity issues from colleagues working at other utilities.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in real quick and note that one of the big limitations in our reporting and in our qualitative sort of study and doing the interviews that we're doing is that, especially in Ontario, there's such a wide variety of service providers there. And so there may well be areas where there are constraints. We definitely want to acknowledge that. And I think it winds up coming down to the dialogue and the planning and the ability of those local jurisdictions to work directly with the development community. For sure, there's going to be challenges that are not easy to overcome that will impact on our ability to move forward in this. I don't think that it's widespread and a general statement that we can make across the country, but for sure there's going to be some localized areas. I guess I would bring Kirk into, you're obviously focused on Toronto Hydro, but just in terms of what you're hearing from your other LDC colleagues with this kind of issue, I don't know if you have any comments or statements that you might be able to make to respond to the question.
Yeah, again, I think localized constraints are generally not a new phenomenon. Like we've managed growth, and the planning process manages growth very well. It is the rate and timing that generally poses the greatest challenge. Outside of Toronto, a lot of the difficulties that are faced are around timing. Toronto has a unique development profile that constrains our capacity to build new stations. Like that is something that Toronto Hydro has to deal with. Now, outside of Toronto, where the land is readily available in a number of cases, it comes down to a matter of timing and location. So I would say that, again, it's a fairly localized, individualized problem. There are challenges, and the regulatory environment that we operate in, does not generally allow us to overbuild the grid. That is generally not the paradigm we're in right now. So there are rates with which we can add assets or expand the capacity of the grid. Hence, coming back to timing, it's really important that we get the timing correctly.
That's a great answer, and it kind of speaks to another one of the issues that surfaced when we were undertaking our own qualitative analysis, and that is, the regulators that are responding to requests for hardening or for increasing capacity are doing so in the context of the current regulatory framework. So, to the extent that municipalities can implement performance standards, or a province might implement building code requirements that that speak to these issues, or at the federal level, if there was more direct guidance, then that might spur and speed the ability of utilities to more proactively act. And the current requirements are such that they're not really like that. So it's all the more reason to keep having these kinds of conversations and bring that forward to the other policymakers who might put in place conditions that are more conducive to those approvals happening. That's great. We still got about 5 minutes left, John. Could take a few more questions.
So a couple more, and I've just been going for participants by the number of votes or thumbs up that people have around questions. So if there's a question you want to see raised in priority, then please add to it. So the next one's more directed to Toronto Hydro. I think it applies to BC Hydro as well. And then, of course, Will, you probably have some thoughts on this too. But do you see an important role for virtual power plants, demand responses in your planning systems? So thinking of things like the Tesla, batteries and other large scale ones that are in place in Texas and other places.
I'll kick it off, and then the other panelists can chime in. There is a role, but at the moment there is not a very clear technological and regulatory structure that allows large scale integrated distributed energy resources to operate. I mean, a lot of folks talk about the DSO models, there's the LSE models, but really and truly, a lot of that it's quite theoretical in this environment. So I see, there is a role that distributed resources will play going forward, a very critical role in an integrated environment, but there is a lot of work we need to do. First of all, deal in the realms of visibility, Then, we have to deal with controllability of those resources, and then start to actually leverage and optimize them based on their location. That journey is just too early at this point for us to say with any definition that that will be the answer to a lot of the problems that we see coming up.
Yeah, that's great, Kirk. I'd love to hear quickly from Will, and then maybe just really quickly from Aaron on the topic. We've only got a couple minutes left, so maybe pretty punchy answers.
Okay. I think there's a huge opportunity here. I think that it doesn't have to be done at scale, and I don't think we have to wait 20 years to figure it out. I think that we can, and I am actually aware of some distribution companies, utilities that are actually conducting pilots right now, where we put a small amount of distributed resource in individual homes, such as a little bit of solar PV, a little bit of energy storage system, that the utility has access to, and then that power can be aggregated on call to have something meaningful. So, for instance, you put 2 Powerwall in 1,000 homes, you've got a megawatt hour storage capacity that the utility can tap into on demand and deploy as required and as needed. So, these projects can start very small. They can start with 5 homes, 10 homes. We don't have to risk impact to the safety of life and property, as is the distribution company's priority, but we can still conduct meaningful experimentation and determine what the best path forward here is.
Thanks, Will. Aaron, real quick.
Yeah, my quick answer is that we're going down the road of the DER if you use demand response as part of that DER. So we're walking down that road, and we're adding batteries and solar to that in the coming years. A lot of what was said about the challenges, early days, all that apply, but where we're starting, we got some funding to do that, and that again is all part of this idea of how can we reduce demand. Amazing,
great. Well, I'm going to just share a couple of last slides here to close us out for the day. Of course, I would absolutely like to thank our panelists. It takes some time and energy to prepare and to share your knowledge. We really, really appreciate it. Appreciate you guys engaging with the Building Decarbonization Alliance, and of course to all of you who took time out today to attend and listen. I think there's some pretty good points that we can bring forward when we talk about these issues, or at least when we're presented with these issues out in the information space. Quick reminder, obviously, if you already are a partner of the Alliance, we thank you so much for being a partner. But if you're not, signing up is at no cost, and it allows you to stay up to speed on what we're up to. And of course, keep your eyes peeled for our announcements coming up on the forum. It's going to be a really great event in the spring here. And we're looking forward to many of you continuing these kinds of conversations in person and rolling up our sleeves and finding some solutions that we can bring forward. And that's it. We're at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank the team at the BDA for putting all this together. It's never easy to pull all of these pieces together. So thanks to them, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you so much, everyone.